Good morning, or welcome everybody to the 8th Circle of Wine Writers online seminar titled The Future of Wine Tourism Post-COVID-19. I think ciao is probably also appropriate, as we are here to welcoming a number of guests in Italy today, but obviously we're welcoming everybody who's come along today to join our online seminar. This is an extra session to our usual weekly session, and also takes a slightly different format, as we're very lucky to have five speakers here, led by Michelle Shah of the Circle Committee, who will be moderating this event. It will be slightly longer than our normal event, and probably be about 45 minutes discussion with a 15-minute Q&A session at the end. So please do send through any questions, and we'll run through those at the end, whether I unmute you and ask you to do the question, or whether I'll ask them on your behalf. We'll sort that out later. As you can see, before I hand over to Michelle, please note that this session is being recorded, and you will all be muted apart from the speakers during this session. Welcome to you all, and I do hope you enjoy the morning. Over to you, Michelle.
Thank you, Andrea. Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining this webinar. So today our focus will be on how to revive wine tourism and how to give producers in wine regions the confidence to return to business. We intend to look at how marketing wine tourism will need to adapt and change by developing more online offers while still being able to offer visits to wineries. So we have a great lineup of speakers who I'd like to present to you. Fiona Morrison, Master of Wine and Circle member, who with her husband Jacques Thiempont runs 3 Bordeaux wine chateaux, as well as the family négociant business. Reva Singh, Circle member, founder and editor-in-chief of India's first wine magazine, Sommeliers India. Marisa Nieuwholt from South Africa is the wine tourism manager at Vinpro, a non-profit company which represents 2,500 South African wine producers, sellers and wine industry stakeholders. Count Francesco Marone Cinzano, owner of Coldorce Estate in Montalcino, and Vigna La Reserva de Calibro, in La Maule Valley in Chile, and Filippo Magnani, Circle member and professional wine guide based in Tuscany. So I think we'll go straight over to Bordeaux and to Fiona. Fiona, Bordeaux, of course, is known as La Cité du Vin, housing the world's first interactive wine museum. Bordeaux is also home to popular marathons, which Chateau organize annually through the vineyards. Will these continue to exist, and how will the industry have to adapt to the challenges?
Well, Bordeaux has woken up after far too long, and has, with the Cité du Vin, really had given a boost to global tourism and mass tourism in a sense. The Cité du Vin is brilliantly organized in compartments, so actually it is quite well adapted to the COVID situation, in that they can limit the groups going through. Mm-hmm. What I think is most interesting for the museum is that their outreach programs. Tourists used to come to Bordeaux and not really feel, when they were in the city of Bordeaux, that they were in one of France's greatest wine capitals. So the Cité du Vin has really built up a great link between wine and the city. But also they have great outreach programs. They have programs during the harvest to bring visitors out to see the harvest at various properties. They have a very good program with our Institute of Science of the Vine and Wine, which is an amazing, huge wine education and wine research department, to go out and do groups to the chateaus. So I see the Cité du Vin as a really important link for the future in controlling tourists so that there's safe distances, but also providing that really important link between the city and the vineyards beyond. On a micro level, what we are doing and what a lot of other chateaux are doing is, of course, we can't receive big groups at the moment, but we're turning the whole communication strategy not so much on the techie sides of visiting the inside of a cellar or knowing what blend of grape varieties are in each year or whether we use what type of natural yeasts or technical yeast or whatever. We're talking much more about the story, the anecdotes, spending time in the vines, which of course being outside reduces the risk. I would say this, I love telling stories about wine. I just published a book about this. And it's, to me, the more authentic side. And I think if COVID has taught us anything about the wine business, but also in communication in general, is that stories count and the authenticity counts. And that's what we hope to provide visitors, obviously not in huge masses, because that's not impossible, but we hope to be able to provide that going on in the future. And I think our strategy will change probably forever because of that.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, that's an interesting side of it, but as you mentioned, there's going to be, I think, less interaction with wine lovers on a one-to-one, well, on a one-to-one basis, yes, but on a sort of a more popular level. Does that mean that wine tourism, in a way, will become a little more elitist?
I think I don't like the word elitist, because, of course, with wine, we do get accused of that sometimes. I think probably the word targeted is better. I do believe that these webinars and information sessions will continue post-COVID. I think people really like being able to speak and to talk and see the winemakers. And certainly I've been doing a lot of them, and Jacques and I have been doing quite a lot, and a lot of other people. And I think it gives an up-close and personal aspect, which we didn't really have before. So I think that's that will target a wider group. But in some ways, yes, there is an elitism. There's an elitism about going to good restaurants. There's an elitism about, staying at a decent hotel. It doesn't have to do with quality, it has to do with choice. And I think that if we talk more about targeted, we can select, or we can welcome visitors without having to, the stigma of being elitist. I hope that point is clear. But I certainly feel that whether it's a group of WSET students or tourists coming out from the city for the day from Bordeaux, or this sort of commanderie de Bordeaux from Taiwan or whatever, we can receive them all, but in a targeted way, in a more limited way, and spending much more time out in the vines. And there's so much more to learn in the vineyards than there is in the actual cellars.
Thank you, Fiona. That's great. Well, I think I'll go over to Filippo, and good morning, Filippo. And ask
good morning.
Filippo, what sort of strategies has the Italian wine tourism sector developed to better align itself with catering to the response to visit wineries and taste wines? Maybe you can talk us through some of the differences between virtual versus real winery visits for wine lovers and wine enthusiasts, and how effective are these virtual tours and tastings in your experience?
Yes, thank you, Michelle. I want just to thank everybody for joining this group, and sorry for my English is not so perfect, so I will put down some slide to help my exposition, if you don't mind. I'd just share the screen. So basically, as you know, in Italy, in the last 20 years, the wine tourism has developed tremendously from north to south, from big wineries to small wineries, from modern wineries to more artisanal, family-run, pretty much all wineries, they were ready to welcome and to visitors, Italians or international, and to increase their positioning, their marketing, but also their direct sales. Of course, nowadays we are facing, with the arrival of COVID, we are facing new challenges. And so during the last 2 or 3 months that I had the chance to run a webinar and one discussion on Zoom or WhatsApp call with a lot of wine producers, I have been aware that they are doing something, especially in terms of welcoming people. As you probably know, the 3rd of June, Italy will be ready to open its borders, hopefully, to not only in between Italians, so the travelers between Italian regions, but also with European travelers. So now what what I have perceived with my conversation, that of course there is a big interest, a big organization of Italian wineries to run the traditional visit on the left side, more crafted, more customized, with, of course, the traditional method that we all know for receiving customers or receiving visitors. Of course, I want just to underline the focus on open air experiences, such as a picnic, such as wine tasting, vineyards, and so on. This is due also for the physical distances that governors or our government is focusing and is forcing everybody to respect. So we need to take these into consideration. But of course, what Italy has lacked, especially in a wine business, it was this use of digital. Everybody is talking about, and I think there is a trend to go on digital much more. The acceleration of using digital not only by the winery but also to the winery from wine lovers or wine visitors, no matter who are. So, for example, there is a lot of wineries that implemented the free Wi-Fi, not only in the cellar or the tasting room, but around the wineries, to let people to subscribe and to let people to engage also when they are while they are touring in the vineyards. Digital device, there is a new some wineries, Italian wineries, for example, they are delivering branded digital device to let again visitors to to have a pictures, to do their comments, whatever they want during the wine tours, the winery tours. More geolocalization in every site, website, live streaming from the wineries, which will be again very important for engagement, and a lot of a lot of the use of application for customer travel assistance. So there is really a big trend on this direction, the digital at the winery for wine lovers or wine enthusiasts. But of course, if this acceleration it was at the winery, it is on the wineries, the digital acceleration, it is on the wineries, we have to recap thinking how is the general way to buy a travel experience. I have tried to divide it two different methodology or two different manners. On the left side, the traditional approach that probably it is still used, as Fiona said, for more people who are more knowledgeable, people or travelers who are more wine professional in a wine professional business, who probably they organize the wine tours or the winery visit by themselves. I'm thinking about wine association, wine clubs, sommeliers, but also they are using local wine expert or travel agency to pay extra money to let them organize in a proper wine tours. Of course, there is a new trend of digital or online platform, the so-called marketplaces. I have put a few example here, but there are many more in Italy now, that wineries and wine lovers, they are using of proposing, selling, and also buying wine experiences all over the world in the Italian through those channels. Basically, they are like Booking.com or Airbnb transfer to this concept transfer on the wine tourism in Italy, and this is something that is very, very high considered now into the wineries. It's also in a top brands. They have started to use those methods for selling wine experiences. Of course, we have, I think, in the future we will be able to use those digital innovations either from the wineries, but also to buying or to sell wine visit or winery tours. But at the end, as Fiona said, the unique approach of personal touch of people who are working professionally at the winery, but also in a wine travel business is very important, as is unreplaceable. So I think we will need to use the device, but at the end, especially for certain targets, the unique, the value which are around the wine, a memorable, unique wine tours. Here I put some photos that probably they are more very representative on Italian lifestyle, for example, are very important to put emphasis in the future for a good wine journey. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Filippo. Well, I think that was very interesting to see the difference between the two, but I'd like to ask Francesco Marone Cinzano, who has an estate, as I said before, Coldorcia in Montalcino, and also an estate in Chile. But now the question to the estate in Montalcino. Francesco, I know that you have been working both with the virtual kind of tours and tastings, but of course you have great experience with the live real experience. Can you tell us how you feel about the two possible winery tours, virtual versus real winery visit?
Yes. Well, it's interesting. I was listening to Fiona and Filippo, and I find I agree with them, and insofar as the virtual experience we are doing now, tastings with groups of consumers, not too large. I find 8 or 10 maximum is the best number, so that there can be interaction, there can be question and answer. Those are convivial, more convivial than usual physical visits to the winery that tend to be more technical. There's something interesting. You enter people's homes, and usually it happens at the aperitif time. It's 7 o'clock in the evening, and they are relaxed, and we often end up exchanging recipes for pairings with the wines rather than talking about technicalities. But in any event, I try to use the virtual meetings, the virtual tastings, the smart tastings as a preview to a future visit to the estate. So I'm hoping we will be able to resume the traditional tastings on location, and maybe do them in a more light-hearted manner than we used to before COVID, in a more convivial way, as we are learning from the virtual tastings, the virtual encounters.
Thank you. Well, I also agree. I think virtual tastings is going to be part of our future way of visiting a winery and tasting wines. And I like the fact that you said that it should be more convivial you know, easygoing. But then, of course, you also have to be, I would say, a good presenter. You know, the winemaker must also be able to, you know, interact and entertain also via the sort of virtual platform. But I'm now going would like to go over to Chile, as you also have a winery in Chile, and I believe that Chile is still sort of in the infancy, looking to create its wine tourism identity. That the basic tools are still needed, like infrastructure, communication, and wine associations. Do you think that by starting from scratch, it'll be easier to build a tourism that can successfully implement all these new requirements, also social distancing and safety, as well as virtual tours, and the future that we're looking at?
Yes, that's right. That's what usually happens when you have to build infrastructure, and you do it according to the latest innovations. And so the current experience is going to be useful in the investments that are needed. Chile has been doing wine tourism for the domestic market mainly in recent years, but with the expansion of the wine producing region and the wine producing region that exports wines, there are areas that have been recognized by the government as real potential for international travelers, and that's where we were asked by the government, where should we put the money? And we have to start from signposts on the roads indicating the opportunity of wine tastings, of cellar visits, of spending some time in the vineyard, and so on. And we have to equip tasting rooms. Everything really has to be done from scratch, and it's quite exciting because there is a lot of opportunity, and we see things blooming from zero, which is a good time to be there.
And is wine tourism mainly directed to foreign visitors, or is there a lot of national interest as well for winery visits and wine tastings?
Well, it's a little bit like Italy. There's a lot of difference in the way, in the interest that wine lovers, domestic wine lovers, as opposed to international ones, what they look for in the visit. We have in Chile, we have a lot of Brazilians, a lot of Hispanos from Mexico, from Central America. Many of those come and visit. We see less of those in Italy. And the domestic visitors tend to be large families, bigger groups. The international travelers are usually couples or small groups, 4 people. And the approach also is different. You have to give them more cultural content to the visit. For international travelers, it's more food and drink for the domestic market.
Yes, I was just also wondering how one's going to be able to still, you know, fit in children into winery visits, and you know, make it also possible for children to enjoy this. And maybe Marisa from South Africa can give us some insight into that, into spaces, because South Africa has a lot of, I think, a lot of space to offer, but it's also, you know, it's I think it's quite a complex situation, and you've got some challenges there with the timelines for reopening wine tourism. But I think that South Africa and South African producers have some very creative approaches to their sort of re-imaging and preparing themselves for the opening of wine tourism in December 2020. Is that correct?
That's correct, Michelle. Thank you. And thank you for inviting me to join you today. Yes, our wineries certainly find themselves in quite a unique and challenging situation. We're busy with a national lockdown. We're about 2 months, 8 weeks behind Europe and North America from the date that our first infection of COVID-19 was registered. So we're just coming out of a phased lockdown now. We're currently at level 4, and unfortunately during the lockdown and this level, our wineries weren't allowed to sell any wine domestically. So we were reliant on our wine exports, which was also a little bit stop and start during the process there. Yeah, but we're very pleased to say that last night we heard from our president again that we would be moving to level 3 on the 1st of June. So we would be allowed to sell wine again during specific times and using specific channels. If I look at the 5 phases of our exiting our lockdown, we've got currently domestic tourism scheduled to start only in December of this year, which, as I'm sure you can imagine, it's simply too long a period of time. It's the social contact, the personal movement that makes tourism a high-risk activity. So we've spent a lot of time talking to our wineries about how we can de-risk our offering. And one of the biggest benefits, and that you've touched on, that they've spoken to us about, is the fact that we have all of the space. How do we utilize our vineyards? How do we utilize our cellars? Setting up different tasting stations at different places on your winery, just to fully use that space. We've had a very nice webinar last week where a couple of our South African wineries spoke about what they were planning to do when they reopen. And Creation Wines, which is in the Hemel Aarde wine valley, they've had quite a novel approach to how they're doing things. They are, at the moment, they're training all of their staff so that they're knowledgeable on all the different areas of the business. So when you arrive at the winery, you will have an ambassador, and that person will spend the whole time that you are there with you. So you won't have a host welcoming you and a waiter and a sommelier and a 4th person taking you on a tour of the vineyards. You have a designated host, and that's very clever because it lessens the contact to the number of people that
Absolutely.
you have.
Yes.
Yeah, but also it still makes it very personal, because what can happen with all these social distancing measures and a lot of the health and safety measures is that it can start to feel, excuse the pun, it can feel quite distant. What that does, it allows you to build a bit of a relationship and a rapport with the person that you have there. They are also very quick on the draw with the announcement that we'd be allowed wine sales again. So what they've done is they've got online wine sales, and then when you have your wine delivered, you can also get a food pairing delivered with it, a Creation food pairing that they've called Cocoon, because we are coming out of the cocoon. So they've matched the food, lots of different little tasting options that if you're local, they'll have delivered with your wine. So I think that hyper-local focus and that domestic focus that we spoke about also comes through a lot with our wineries.
Great. And what is the actual divide between national wine tourism and international? Because I know a lot of, people from abroad, when they go over, they love to go to Stellenbosch, Franschhoek, and even to the restaurants there. Yeah. What is this kind of divide that there is, in percentage between the two?
What we generally see, Michelle, is about 70% of our visitors are domestic, they're South Africans, and a very large proportion of those visitors travel within the same province. So that's fortunate for us, and that's why we've lobbied really hard to have that domestic market opened up a little bit sooner, because that represents quite a large number of our visitors, and it's a very low risk profile. They don't have to travel very far, they don't have to stay overnight, and it's really good business for our wineries. If you go to the popular routes like Franschhoek and Stellenbosch, It's closer to a 50% split, so you'll have 50% domestic and 50% international. So we do very much need our international visitors, but for now, we just want to get some revenue into our businesses again, and we're quite well suited to catering for those domestic visitors. They know us, they trust us. That's going to be a very important commodity post-COVID is trust, and they already have a relationship with us that we can just keep going with them.
Great. Well, I wish you and the South Africans a lot of luck and success with opening up again to wine tourism.
Thank you.
Right. So we're going to shift gears and go to the Indian continent because I'd like to ask Reva, where I believe, you know, in India, wine tourism is developing also with hospitality and tasting. But I'm really curious to ask you, Reva, about the Sula Fest, which is a popular wine, food and music festival, which is organized by Sula Vineyards, which is India's leading national wine producer, which in their last event attracted some 400,000 wine lovers over 3 days, making it the largest wine festival of its kind in the world. Well, given the times, do you think something like that is going to be possible in the future? What is India sort of doing about their wine tourism?
Well, let me begin by saying that when you mention wine tourism, and India is not the first country that comes to mind. But if you drop wine from the equation, India suddenly becomes a lot more interesting. So wine tourism as part of gastronomy and cultural tourism is in which tourists can experience unique culture and the lifestyle of a destination is key. In a relatively short time, Indian wines are winning international awards and have made a name for themselves, often coupled with Indian cuisine. So people are no longer surprised when they come across a Grover Zampa, a Fratelli, or a Sula on a Michelin star restaurant list, to mention just a few labels. So I would say there is a great future for wine tourism in India, a country as exotic as India that has so much to offer the traveler now has one more compelling reason to visit. And the wineries in India have woken up to the importance of wine tourism and are responding to this new found interest. There is an element of curiosity when you drink a glass of wine or wine is poured in your glass. You want to know where it has come from, where it was made, the story behind the wine and the people who make it. So all of this is creating an interest in India. You would never associate India, you think of Napa Valley or Bordeaux or Tuscany, but India for drinking wine, for visiting a vineyard. And in this, Sula, to come back to your question, has played a very major part. It is our biggest winery and a pioneer in wine tourism. It has it has several beautiful resorts where people can stay now. There is the Sula Sula Source, I think, Source by Sula, which is a 23-room resort. It has tree houses, it has a spa, it has a pool, and lots else. Then there's the Sky Villa, which is a villa for 9 or 10 people. You can book the entire villa. And the very first one was Beyond, which just had 7 rooms. So all of this Sula has been doing progressively. And in addition to this, of course, there is this Sula Fest, which is now in its 13th year. And it
13?
is,
Wow.
Yes, yes. And it's an annual event which takes place in February. It's a very, it's a very popular event around the world, I'm sure. But even within India, it has 400,000 visitors, as you mentioned this time. But, you know, it's a carnival atmosphere, and it has lots of other things to see and do. There is uh, a flea market. There is um, yoga in the vineyards, picnics, all sorts of things. And it is perhaps one of the first places where a lot of people taste wine. It's a great introduction for our people who have never tasted wine to, to taste their first glass of wine. So it's played, and they sell about 3 to 4% of their total 1 million cases during this carnival. But you can imagine.
So it's quite profitable in a way.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It's very. It's. I mean, it's one of the biggest. It's one of the most visited wineries in the world, perhaps, when you take all this account. Sula is, and it's one of the places.
So what are they going to do?
Well,
what are they going to do?
now, at this point of time, everything's at a standstill. The impact of COVID-19 has been dire, especially with the sudden countrywide lockdown, which took place on 25th March. There was no warning. It was announced at 8 p.m. in the evening, and the lockdown came into place at midnight. And since then, it's been a very one of the most stringent in the world. And the wineries, fortunately, had more or less finished their harvest, and they got permission to complete it in the cases where they hadn't finished it. But after that, it was all shut down. No sales were taking place, and they lost out in many ways, because during the harvest, people come to visit the wineries, or there's school holidays. That's the time when people visit. No shops open, no hotels, no restaurants. People eager to buy and drink wine, but no wine is to be had. So the government had the choice between saving lives or livelihoods. But it was a botched lockdown. There was no planning, there was no warning, and it resulted in several thousands of migrant workers losing their jobs, returning home to their villages and small towns, even if it meant walking all the way.
Yeah.
There was, a complete loss of trust and confidence among the people, and it is heartrending to see. Indian winery, of course, was deeply affected by the crisis, and now a lot depends on the moves the government takes to get things going again. And we are expecting things to open up from the 1st of June. They have started opening up retail shops in a measured way, because when they announced and opening up, there was such a mad rush to buy wine and other alcohol that they closed it the next day. So there's been a lot of uncertainties of this kind. The only silver lining for wine tourism is that it is not the tourist season, although it is too early to say what the near future holds, but the producers are cautiously optimistic. Nashik is just 3 or 4 hours drive away from thousands of potential visitors. And this is what people are hoping for, the local visitor, the wine lover, who are tired of being cooped up at home and wanting to visit. Then they
sorry to interrupt you. Is there a growing interest between the Indian nationals to visit wineries more than the visits from the international tourists?
Well, in the local visitors is huge.
Yes.
There are many, people within India who are keen on visiting the wineries. Who are keen, Indians like to travel, whether they're traveling within their own country or they're traveling overseas. And some of these numbers are phenomenal. I mean, we have a population of 300 million, 1.3 billion. And somebody in the wine trade told me recently that within India, the footfalls, not individuals, but footfalls is 1.8 billion, I think he said. There's lots of people wanting to travel, and and because of this interest in wine, they learn more about wine by visiting these wineries. And the wineries are not mainly in Nashik, many wineries, but they are also in Karnataka, in the south of India. And every winery has some kind of hospitality offering now. So there is all this going on. And we don't know, the potential is great. Wineries are not as hard hit as city and business hotels, which are much worse off, because wine resorts, after all, are situated in the midst of a vineyard.
Yes.
An open space. People are willing to, visit them. And this is the time when people are, looking to the future. And even though after the industry has received a body blow with huge losses to the tune of 1,000 to 30,000 crores. Now, I mean, it's not easy to translate that into international numbers, but I think 10 million makes a crore. So you can imagine the loss in Alcobev revenues as much for the wine producers as for the government. So they too are keen to open up and allow wine tourism to begin, wine drinking to begin, and so forth. Now, looking to the future, this is the time for them to adapt. Unlike other places, I don't see too much of digital interface as yet. It's very small, but it has immense potential, and it will pick up very quickly, I'm sure, because this is what the wine producers are spending their time and thinking about, I hope. And especially if they want to reach the international traveler, it'll bring them into their wineries, into the vineyards, and plan tailor-made tours for them. But I don't see virtual tastings happening.
Well, I think this is the way that everybody's going to probably need to go ahead, and I think it's a good way to go ahead, because it kind of lays the ground for that further step. Maybe I didn't. I was a bit provocative when I said elitism to Fiona. I didn't really, but I mean, of course, I think I think travel in any case will be something, a little more difficult, maybe, and a little, more restricted in the future. Maybe not so much mass traveling as there has been in the past. Maybe not so many cheap flights and things like that. And I think everything probably, as Fiona said, will follow foot. The visit to the, top restaurants, the visit to the top estates will be a little bit more restricted. And there'll be more, more to see online, more development. I'd like to ask my panel if anybody else has something else. Yes.
I just want to add over here that this is the time for wine producers to rebuild, to regroup, to see how they're going to reach the consumer, what changes they can make, and to invest in sustainable and experiential tourism. And they mustn't lose contact with the consumer, and they must stay connected communicate and be prepared for the time when all of this is over, which hopefully it will be. The virus won't go away, but things will be partially open, and they should be able to say, we are back. And the entire region should get together and should, cooperate and sing the same song that Nashik wine country or Indian wine country is swinging, is back.
Thank you. Anybody else on the panel wanting to maybe make another comment on how important it is to build up this communication with wine lovers through virtual events? Fiona, yes.
I think one thing we touched upon when we were discussing amongst us, which is really important, is the link to the winemaker or the owner or the viticulturist. What people are seeking, they are going to make a substantial effort these days to actually visit a winery. And what they really want is to get the message from the main person. Perhaps they've been spoiled in some ways, because with these webinars, they've had connections with us. And we're feeling that people really want to say, can we come? But we'd really like to spend time with you, or we'd really like to spend time with a winemaker. Well, it's the same thing, but, and I think all of us have touched upon this, but really concentrating on the visitor experience. And I think Francesco mentioned that really as well. It's the environment, it's those beautiful cypress trees behind Francesco, it's the glass of wine. It's not about tasting notes, it's experience and personality.
Yeah, I thoroughly agree with you. Francesco, standing there with the beautiful cypress trees behind you, what would you say? I mean, I've taken some groups to Coldorce, and we've had some fantastic shared time with Francesco and his wife. And that, I think, to me also was one of the most special moments, and to the visitors that I brought, about visiting a winery. So Francesco.
Well, yes, this week, the tastings I'm doing around Italy, well, from the winery, but in different Italian cities with wine shops that organize their customers. They deliver the bottles to them, to the group, and then we open them all together. I'm doing the presentation from the olive grove, because the small olives are apparent on the plant now, and it gives me an opportunity to almost make them touch the countryside, because it's all about living an experience, living an emotion, and it's with the Consorzio Brunello, we've been looking at the communication and how we should direct the communication for tourism. And we are having, and you said a little bit about that, Michelle, we're having trouble defining the target market at this stage. The wine lovers that have always traveled, they are contacting us, and they want to resume their visits. But a larger crowd, a larger group, I still don't see clearly who I should direct the message to, who is going to be able to travel and come and visit us physically, and who, on the other hand, we should approach on a smart tasting basis.
Thank you. And from South Africa, that you have so much space, Marisa. Does South Africa, and can South Africa cater for the big bus loads, and will they do that, or is that also kind of like gonna sort of phase out a little bit?
Yeah, I think there's probably the biggest question marks around that. as well as our events and festivals. There honestly isn't a month of the year where we don't have a major food and wine festival, Michelle. So we're probably going to see much smaller groups come through to our wineries. And that's such a good question. I wanted to speak about accessibility, have the point having been raised. And one of our audience members also commented on that. Thank you, Christos. Is we're so well known for having this physically incredibly accessible wine tourism offering. On any given weekend day, you can drive into a winery, walk in, you don't need an appointment, and you have a menu of tasting options in front of you. We are probably going to have to sacrifice that level of accessibility in the next couple of months. I don't see how most of our wineries will be able to host tastings without an appointment or a reservation, at least initially. But, and I think it's a good point that Fiona also made, is we're trading that physical form of accessibility for a different type of accessibility that the virtual presence has brought for us, that having a winemaker in your lounge has brought for us, that wine and food and wine pairing is now so much more accessible to more people than it has been before. And I think that's quite powerful. A byproduct of our situation was that virtual tastings we could do for the first month or so, and then people started running out of wine. And a dry wine tasting is probably not an ideal thing to present in the middle of prohibition. So what we did is we focused on cooking classes and food and wine pairing, and food is something that people know. So again, that made it a little bit more accessible. So a little bit less technical, but more accessible and more personal.
Thank you, Marisa. Well, I think now we should actually go to some questions and answers from anybody listening who would like. Maybe Andrea, you could see if there's some questions.
Yes, no, there's one from Keith here, Keith Granger from the Circle Committee also. He has a question for Francesco. Go ahead, Keith.
Hi, Francesco.
Hi.
And to everyone else as well. Wine tourism is an important profit centre for wineries large and small. Can virtual tourism ever contribute to income?
Well, yes, the way I'm trying to structure this is to work with the wine shops, the enoteche as we call them. This is what I'm doing in Italy, at least. And precisely those wine shops that used to organize maybe a Friday afternoon tasting in the shop, now they are delivering the same bottle, 2-3 bottles, obviously purchased by the wine lovers. They deliver at home. An appointment is made 7 p.m. This evening, and we connect on Zoom. And we start talking about the wines, we start talking about the pairings, we start talking about many other things. And eventually I might mention a wine that's not in the tasting and describe it to them. And then they ask the wine shop to purchase it. And I feel providing the origin, the traceability of the wine through the virtual tasting, through the smart tasting, should eventually or is generating small sales, but eventually should generate better sales. That's the plan, at least.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions? I have any on the chat.
Okay, can I give one more though? People come away from a wine revisit as an ambassador. And of course, you know, that this person talks to 10 people who talk to 10 people. And once again, that physical contact, I think, is important. So leading back to my previous question, perhaps Fiona might care to answer this. How do you create ambassadors by the online experience?
Microphone. Fiona's microphone's on.
I think I'm okay. I think every contact you have with a customer or a potential customer has to be a great experience. You have to show your personality. You have to go towards people. It can be online. It can be real. I mean, I think we've all had the experience and all learned so much about online communications. So I think an online communication can be just as authentic if your message is authentic, if you're really speaking from the heart, if you're really speaking from your own experiences. You're not just reading out a tasting sheet. So many people are interested in our dogs. You know, that we actually pick our salad amongst the plants that grow between the vine rows. Little details like that are so important. And I think that will create ambassadors because they feel that they've got an inside track, that you've shared something that maybe you haven't shared with anyone else. And they feel part of that sort of private club. Does that answer your question, Keith?
Does indeed, thank you.
Thank you, Fiona. There's a question here from Wink Law. Wink, please go ahead.
Hi. Yeah, sorry, I've just unmuted myself. Can you hear me now?
We can, yes, thank you.
Yeah, great. Thanks for the presentation to all. This is, I guess I'd love a comment from Fiona on the French side and maybe Felipe from the Italian side. But this presentation seems to have been completely and utterly to do with large and fairly financially, for the moment, stable wineries, as you would find in Bordeaux, as you would find in Tuscany, as you would find in the New World. But there are millions, literally millions of smaller wineries, especially in France and in Italy, that need wine tourism, perhaps particularly for wine sales. Perhaps they're over-reliant on wine tourism for wine sales. But on the other hand, they're so small that they don't have the time necessarily to do what I think it was Fiona, or it might have been Michelle, advised towards the end, that said people are looking for that link to a winemaker, the winemaker or the viticulturalist or the owner. And yet in the wineries I'm talking about, they're all one person. And they might have their, if it's a man, they might have their spouse there to receive, or perhaps an aged parent, but they don't have the time if they're on a tractor. And I see a disconnect, and I know that it's a problem that needs to be resolved. And I'd just like some thoughts from, as I say, Fiona and maybe Felipe.
Should I go first, Felipe?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, my heart goes out to the incredible number of small producers who are in a really bad difficulty, who don't know how they're going to be able to harvest the 2020 vintage and are really suffering. Having said that, a lot of money has been spent by local communes and by the CIVB in Bordeaux in helping develop tourism with just basic things like brochures, guides, signs pointing to wineries. A lot, which seems so ridiculous, but if you can't afford to put a sign up, no one's going to find you. Also, a lot of direct sales. People like direct sales. A lot of people are traveling by car these days, and I think that will continue. We're all worried about our carbon footprints. I think there'll be more car travels. So the people are looking to that small little winery. Yes, I know, because we're a small winery, and even though we are on a high scale of things, I would like to put an appeal out to everyone, is that when you do plan a winery visit, stick to your appointments. The amount of times that we have all been called in from the vineyards because we're expecting a 3 o'clock appointment, not to have them show up, or to show up 2 hours later, that's really bad. But I do believe that if we can do things like Airbnb or guest house, or offering a little picnic, I mean, the South Africans are brilliant at that, and offering something that can contribute to the experience, just allowing visitors to just picnic in your property, or even walk through your vineyards, I think helps. It doesn't help a lot, and I know the price of bulk wines in Bordeaux has never been so low, and my heart really goes out to a lot of people who are suffering all over France. So I thank you, Wink, for bringing up that point. It's an important one. Felipe.
Yes, for sure. When I select in my business, when I select a winery for having a unique experience, I think we are all agreed that the human part, so be in touch with one producer, winemaker, the owner, it makes the difference, of course. And as you said, with in a small winery, sometimes it's not easy. Sometimes it's not easy because they are busy working the vineyard and the cellars. I think we should probably put emphasis on training people in between the family or around their friends or around their municipality of doing the so-called travel wine ambassador. So a friend or a wine guide, a local wine guide who is very keen of delivering the same philosophy, the same human touch, the same human atmosphere at the place of the wine producer. So I think in this context, we how do you say, the elements of training people, local people, for welcoming visitors on domestic, either domestic markets or international, is very important, because I have been in touch with many small producers, helping them in Tuscany, in Piedmont, in Sicily, for training themselves, but also the family members, of understanding the global wine travelers disease or desire or request, but delivering an authentic local experience. So from my point of view, thinking globally, act locally. This is my approach. And I think some local expert, they can do the same in relation with the small wineries.
Yeah. Thank you both. I think they were different and both very important points, but I do wonder whether we as wine writers who talk about wineries that perhaps can be visited should perhaps just for the smaller wineries just try and step back a bit from the cult of the owner stroke winemaker stroke viticulturalist, so that we can encourage consumers to visit these wineries, but not necessarily expect always to meet that owner or cult winemaker, because it is actually financially impossible for them and time-wise impossible. And if they can do if you can have alternatives like Felipe has just discussed and just mentioned, trained guides and so on, I just do believe that sometimes those of us who write about visiting, or even if we lead tours, sometimes we should accept that it won't be the main head honcho that is the famous one, because that person has actually got to make that wine, whether it's making that wine in the vineyard or the winery. So I think there's a bit of a disconnect that needs to be addressed by all of us who work in this business. But thanks.
I don't have any further questions coming up on the chats, Michelle. So.
Right. So I guess if then no further questions, well, I'd like to thank you all for attending this webinar, and hope it's been of interest with some good points to consider. I'd especially like to thank each speaker in the panel for your time and for making this such an interesting meeting. Thank you all very much.